The X-Zone radio and TV show is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X-Zone radio and TV show or in any manner endorsed by Rob McConnell, Relmar McConnell Media Company, Talkstar Radio Network, its affiliated stations, or employees.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And welcome back to the X Zone, everyone. My name is Rob McConnell, coming to you from the earthquake-shaken city of Hamilton, Ontario, here in Canada. We're about, 40 miles west of Toronto. And it's funny, well, I shouldn't say funny, but synchronicity works in many strange ways, as we all know by now. A 5.8 magnitude earthquake centered in the state of Virginia shook much of Washington, D.C. and was felt as far north as Rhode Island, New York City, Hamilton, Ontario, and Toronto. The U.S. Geological Survey said the earthquake was 6 kilometers deep. Now, shaking was felt at the White House and all over the East Coast as far north as Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Parts of the Pentagon, White House, and Capitol were evacuated. Now, a couple of weeks ago, we planned this hour. And my guest is Norris L. Beren, and we're going to be talking about 101 ways, to make sure your family is ready for any emergency situation. Well, with terrible natural disasters that hit the southern U.S., and we saw what happened in Goderich, Ontario yesterday, and now today an earthquake, it has many people wondering, am I ready for an emergency? Now, risk management expert and health advocate Norris Beren, who is our guest this hour, is going to help our listeners, you, the X-Zone Nation, ready in case anything happens. And he's going to tell us how to truly take charge of their health and well-being. Now, Norris is an expert who will guide our listeners, you, the X-Zone Nation, through preparing yourselves for an emergency, including ways to safeguard your own health during non-emergencies so that you can be ready if the disaster does hit. And Norris, first of all, welcome to the X-Zone. Great having you with us. And this is synchronicity at its best. You know, here we have an earthquake about 45 minutes ago, and bang, here you are today.
Yeah, it was a quiet news day for a while.
Well, it certainly is a welcome change. Now, I don't know if I should say that or not, but I just did. A welcome change from watching all the news on Syria. Like, to be honest with you, I was kind of getting a little sick of it. And Lebanon, so here we are facing an earthquake. And, you wouldn't think that 5.9 is that serious, but in the realm of earthquakes and the Richter scale, how dangerous is a 5.9 earthquake?
Well, first of all, it depends on where it occurs. If it occurs on the West Coast, for example, where buildings are built a heck of a lot better, it probably may not be anywhere near as serious. But when you're talking about the East Coast, where hurricanes, I don't remember the last time a hurricane hit the East Coast, but nonetheless, the level of preparation on the East Coast, both mentally and physically, is just a heck of a lot less. People just don't realize that it could happen, especially in New York City or in Virginia or even the Washington D.C. area. So we're just not prepared for it intellectually or mentally or emotionally, let alone perhaps even physically.
We've got about a minute left before I have to take my first 2-minute commercial break, Norris. Why did you decide to get into emergency preparedness?
I got into it because on September 11th, as a business risk manager, I found myself in the unfortunate position, like so many people, that I couldn't find my kids while the events in New York and in Washington, D.C. and in Pennsylvania were unfolding. I was helpless. And this whole business of family emergency preparedness started going through my head. And very shortly thereafter, I wrote an article about it, and I started talking about it. And then 2 years later, I started writing a book, and I said, there's just a lot of information that needs to be shared with people. And I just kept going. And over the last 10 years, I'll admit it starts and stops, but when there's a major event, I'm one of the first ones around to be able to say, hey, let's talk about it.
And you know what? We're glad that you're with us today because I believe that preparedness is what this world desperately needs in these times. And thank you very much for sharing your time with us, Norris.
You're very welcome.
Explanation, my very special guest on this date is Norris Beren. He's the author of When Disaster Strikes Home, 101 Plus Ways to Protect Your Family from Unthinkable Emergencies. And his website is www.norrisspeaks.com. And we'll be back on the other side of this break in 2 minutes. Don't go away. Oh, yeah, there's a whole lot of shaking going on. 5.9 on the Richter scale is the earthquake that apparently was felt, or the epicenter was somewhere in Virginia, 6 miles below the surface of the earth, and it was felt as far north as Toronto, and people are reporting that they felt it here in Hamilton, Ontario as well. Our guest this hour is Norris Beren, and he's the author of When Disaster Strikes Home, 100 Plus Ways to Protect Your Family from Unthinkable Emergencies. His website is www.norrisspeaks.com. Norris, in your opinion, what are the 3 most important questions to ask before any emergency?
Actually, there's more than 3, but let's just talk about just the 3 that are probably the most important. First of all, talk about what we should do. I always ask people, ask yourself what could happen. It's a what-if scenario. What could happen? What should families talk about in terms of being able to decide? See, in my opinion, we don't really care when we talk about preparedness, the type of event. For the most part, what we care about is how we're going to respond, and to a large extent, whether it's a windstorm, whether it's tornado, whether it's earthquake, hurricane, the response is the same. So I think the very first thing that a family needs to talk about, or even a business, is what could happen. And after we get to that point, I think the next question is, what do we need to do? What is our response going to be? What are the scenarios? What are the options? What actions are we going to take? And then, finally, you want to be able to ask yourself, okay, what kind of plans do we need to make? Communications, food, clothing, shelter, all of those kinds of things. So it really is a circle program. What could happen? What should we do? And what kind of plans should we make?
All right, so when sitting down with your family, discussing emergency preparedness, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who are saying, well, that's what we have fire departments for. That's why we have police. That's why we have the first responders. But I know for a fact in our family, what we do on a regular basis is that we discuss what would happen if we know where the exit points are, and there's a certain area that we have designated as our meet place. So that once we get out of the house or once we get out of our offices, we all congregate to this one place. What are some of the other ways that we can better prepare ourselves for any emergency?
Let me respond first to the comment that you made about what people think, and you're to our extent you're right. But let me suggest something.
Okay.
We are the first responders. Police, fire, emergency services are not the first responders. Your family's safety is your responsibility. So we're the first ones that are on the scene. We're right there right now, and we need to be prepared. First responders can help us, perhaps, when we need help beyond our own capability. For example, getting out of rubble, medical needs, and things of that sort. So I think we should probably change the thinking just a little bit and say, hey, family, we have to be our own first responders. You mentioned communication. Well, communication is extremely important. What if we don't have any communication? I just heard on the TV a report from somebody who said that the only communication that they have under the current situation is two-way radios that some folks had. Apparently cells are not working,
Yeah.
landline phones are not working, there's just no method. So the key question is, how do we communicate? And where do we meet?
Yeah.
What if your family is scattered and they all can't get to the meeting location? You know, if you work in a downtown building and you have somebody going to school and you have another family member doing something else, what if roads are closed? There's no transportation. Public transportation is not going. We can't drive. We can't meet and we can't communicate. Now chaos sets in. Now anguish and anxiety sets in. This is why I say it's so important to have plans. So how do we find each other if we do get separated?
Mm-hmm.
What are the plans for our kids if they're in school or in daycare centers or in an emergency? What if we don't have water or power? What food or supplies, what kind of information and equipment will we need? How long should we prepare for? These are some of the basic kind of questions that we want to think about and start developing answers. We also want to make sure that all family members, or if it's the case of a business, all employees, are part of these discussions. And I don't want to limit a discussion only to families and to people, but even companies with their employees and their families have to be taken into account. Some companies need their people because they're in the service field. On the other hand, there may be a lot of companies that are going to let their people go, but the employees can't get to where they need to go. So we need to ask ourselves a lot of questions, and it's a lot of what if this happens, what if that happens, what if we can't do this, what if we can't do that.
Everybody depends on modern technology, the cell phones, the iPads, the texting, and so on and so forth. As a person who is in emergency preparedness, does the public depend way too much on modern technology?
Absolutely. I don't want to say I'm old school, but I have a strong propensity to going back to, pardon me, two-way radios, ham radios, those kind of devices that do not require anything other than the units themselves and batteries, so that you can access. I would still argue, for example, that somebody using a CB radio in Washington D.C. who only has a CB radio theoretically could get a message across the country if enough people had CB radios, and it's just somebody broadcasting in Washington that just kept saying, look, I've got somebody in California I need to get a hold of. Can we just keep relaying this message all the way west? Theoretically, it's possible. Ham radio is the same way. Shortwave radio is the same way. I think we need to become much more dependent upon old ways that are not so much dependent upon power, for example, electric power, or some of the other technologies, because the day is going to come. It probably has already happened in some parts of the country. We had it happen in Katrina. The day is going to come when we will not have access.
I'm just getting some more of the news feed on the 5.9 earthquake, and we're now told that the Amtrak corridor between New York and Washington has been disrupted by the earthquake, and that there is concern with the nuclear facilities that are in the immediate area of the center of the earthquake. So here we go. Who knows what is going on. And to have an earthquake in this part of the country is very rare. And I believe, Norris, and correct me if I'm wrong, that this caught a lot of people off guard.
Everything catches people off guard, unfortunately. When we have a fire, it catches people off guard. Obviously, an earthquake. The storm, this Irene storm in the Caribbean, came up very suddenly. It's a massive storm. It's one of the largest that I remember in a long time. That's the problem. It's just like illness. In many cases, it comes up just immediately. But we need to be prepared. I really am concerned about the fact that so many people, at least in North America, I'll include Canada in this because I don't think it's much different in Canada, so many people, probably 60 to 70% of the people living in North America are not prepared for disaster. I just went through my disaster supply kit after a year. I probably should have done it sooner, but I just went through. And, I feel like if something could happen in my area, and in fact we did have 2 instances of major storms and power outages for several days in the last 60 days, we got along just fine. It wasn't comfortable, but at least we got along okay.
Well, let me ask you, what belongs in a disaster supply kit?
Well, I think we need to look at some of the more important things that we depend upon.
Okay.
Keep in mind, there are a few things that are basics. For example, water is a basic. So we need water, whether you have cases of water, and water has gotten to be so inexpensive. You buy a case of water for $3.50 or $4, and for 24 or 30 or 36 cases. So they're easy to carry. They're easy to handle. That's the first thing. Water is important. Flashlights. You need flashlights. You need batteries. You have to be able to see. A manual crank radio, self-powering radio, or a battery-operated radio that will give you news and information, very important. Have at least some degree of spare glasses, eyeglasses if you can, medicine if you have to get up, because in many cases I talk a lot about emergency evacuation, like in a fire in the middle of the night where you just want to get out and go. You need to be able to have that, at least medicine, because you may not be able to get it any other way. I tell people when you go to sleep at night, make sure you have a flashlight, a good pair of shoes, and a whistle when you go to sleep at night, every member of the family, because if you have to get out of your apartment, home, whatever, real quick, and you need to wake people up, a whistle is a much better way of doing it than yelling. So those are some of the things. In every case, you want to be able to have whatever it's going to take for you to be comfortable. If it's cold weather, you want to be able to stay warm. If it's warm weather, you want to be able to stay cool. So it's a question of what is your comfort level. What are the things you need to be comfortable and to take care of yourself and to be able to see and get information and those sorts of things. Those are the very, very basics. Don't forget pets.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, of course, if you have pets, you should also make sure that the pets are taken care of in your emergency preparedness kit as well.
And if you have family members that have special needs, whatever their special needs are, whether it be medical equipment or medication or whatever, we need to make sure that we can accommodate them.
Yesterday there was a tornado in Goderich, Ontario. A waterspout came off of Lake Ontario, and what I believe was about 50% of the town was taken down by this tornado. Let's say I'm out on the road. I see a tornado. Where should I seek shelter?
And that's happened to me. You have to be able, first of all, get out of the car. If you're in your car, get out of it, because the wind will come by, that dependency, that false sense of security, the wind will come by and will take that car and just blow it away. You need to get away from wood structures. You need to get away from trees. The best advice, and it may not always be practical, is to get down as low as you can in an area where the debris and the wind will blow over you, rather than blowing at you. So you have to find a way to do it. I know a lot of people will hide under an overpass, what we call an overpass.
Yes.
In the crack of the overpass if they can. Certainly you could get blown away, but it may be better than nothing. But you want to get out of harm's way, and obviously you want to be on the opposite side of the direction that the wind is coming from if you can, but just make sure that whatever you're going to hide behind isn't going to blow away.
All right, stand by. Norris, you and I have to take our commercial break with the news. We'll be back after the news. By the way, the USGS is now reporting 5 aftershocks near the epicenter of that 5.9 earthquake in Virginia. As the details become more available, we'll report them to you, the members of the X Zone Nation. Once again, 5.9 earthquake hits Virginia. The USGS is saying it's the most powerful quake in that state since 1897. Norris Beren is our special guest. We're talking about 100-plus ways to make sure your family is ready for any emergency situation. His website is www.norrisspeaks.com, and we'll be back on the other side of this commercial break as we continue from our studios in beautiful Hamilton, Ontario, Canada.
Come on over, baby. Whole lot of shaking going on. Yes, I say come on.
You're listening to the X Zone Radio Show, live and around the world on the Talkstar Radio Network.
X-Zone Broadcast Network, UK High Definition Radio,
Euro High Definition Radio,
and Star Cable. Our toll-free telephone number worldwide is 1-800-610-7035.
Our email address, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com.
On MSN Messenger, xzoneradiotv@hotmail.com.
And our website,
www.xzoneradiotv.com.
There's got to be a morning after if we can hold on through the night. We have a chance to find the sunshine. Let's keep on looking for the light. Oh, can't you see the morning after? It's waiting right outside the storm. Why don't we cross the bridge together and find the place that's safe and warm?
And welcome back to the X-Zone, everyone. Our guest this hour is Norris Beren. He's a seasoned interviewee on emergency preparedness for families and business. He is a contributor for ABC, NBC, CBS, and the cable news channels. He's the author of When Disaster Strikes Home, 100 Plus Ways to Protect Your Families from Unthinkable Emergencies. And he has more than 35 years' experience as a business owner, speaker, trainer, and risk manager. His new book, Prostate Cancer, Hope is Not a Strategy, Tips from a Survivor, tells the story of his ordeal. While not a medical doctor, his commitment now is to spreading awareness about prostate cancer and encouraging men and the women in their lives to become prepared should they have a health issue and health crisis. Now, we were going to talk to Norris about prostate cancer today, but because of the emergency that a lot of people in the U.S. are facing with this 5.9 earthquake that is centered in Virginia, we decided that we're going to get Norris to come back another day and we'll discuss with him his new book. But Norris, we've talked about the disaster supply kit. We talked about the 6 simple steps to creating a family or business disaster plan. We talked about what people should do if they happen to get caught in a tornado. But let's say the person is in their home and the skies get black. They see the funnel cloud. What should they do? They haven't got time to get to a shelter. What should they do?
And I live in a ranch house, a frame ranch house, and I have no big buildings around me, and I have no brick buildings, and I have no place to hide or to run.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm in exactly the spot that you're describing. And if a big storm were coming in the middle of the night, I wouldn't know it. And that's a big problem. That's something that I'm really concerned about. It's not fun to get caught unprepared because your life and the life of your family is at risk. My recommendation then is, number one, I wish everybody would have an emergency alert radio that would go off with an audible tone or a voice tone or a voice whenever there was the need. The National Weather Service, hits the red button, and all of a sudden these radios all over the country start going off and letting people know that there's an event going on. So that's number one. I think people, they're very inexpensive, they don't cost a lot of money, and I think everybody should have one, along with that flashlight I talked about, etc. But in my case, I guess the only place I can go if I have enough time, I could probably go to a local school or a local shopping mall that's brick and sturdy. But here again, you take a risk because you never know what roof will blow off and what will fall on your head. So you got to be really careful. But my only advice to myself and to others is, I have a brick chimney, and I'm just going to huddle in that bathroom near that brick chimney and just hope for the best. If the building goes, you may be left standing. There's not much choice if you don't have a lot of time. The lead time on a tornado is probably seconds and maybe minutes.
What about windows? Should people open the windows or close their windows?
No, you don't need to do that. Matter of fact, it probably is worse. There's an old notion about equalizing air pressure, but it really doesn't have any value. No, don't open a window. Leave it closed. You're not going to gain anything.
I've always believed that it's a good idea for all the members of the family who are old enough to take a first aid course. Do you recommend that?
Absolutely. CPR is particularly important, but also first aid, just to be able to stop bleeding, deal with somebody that's in shock, recognize certain signs, certainly can be life-saving.
Is there much of a difference when it comes to emergency preparedness between the preparedness plan at home and the preparedness plan at work?
The requirements are certainly different. We haven't talked about some of the things that we would want to prepare. For example, I tell people in the event of a hurricane, there's a number of things that you need to do to your own home. Shut off the power, shut off the water, make certain preparations, unplug things that you don't want to get a power surge, put things in plastic bags, for example, photos and computer disks and computer tapes and all those sorts of things. There's a whole laundry list of preparedness things you want to do. But at work, the problems are even more significant because, first of all, you've got people that are away from their homes. So you have to make a business decision as to when you're going to let people go home unless you need them on the job. But businesses have a whole lot more at stake in terms of property to lose than a homeowner does. A homeowner, they can lose all of their furniture and even all of their clothes and still survive. But if a business loses all of its records and its equipment and furniture and whatever else, recovery becomes extremely difficult if you're not prepared. Things like phone numbers and contact information and important papers and processes and intellectual property, all those sorts of things. When you have a fire, so many businesses never recover because they just don't have the ability to pick up the pieces. So, I spend a lot of time talking to businesses, and I'm absolutely amazed at the number of businesses that do not have a plan. To most businesses, backing up computer tapes is their disaster plan.
You and I were speaking earlier about Hurricane Irene, and we just received an alert from the people at NOAA that, let me see here, hurricane conditions expected to reach the Turks and Caicos Islands very soon. And there are so many websites available now that can give you excellent information. However, and you know what? People forget that if the power goes out, if the lines go down, you could be very well without computer, and then what are you going to do? You're going to have to think for yourself. So I really believe, Norris, that what you're telling people is so important. Prepare for the event before it happens. Prepare. Think ahead. And to me, this is common sense.
Okay, imagine going into a restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
Into a restaurant where you end up in a room inside a room inside a room.
Okay.
Imagine a power failure. I'm talking about a 100% power failure.
Right.
So that even the emergency lights don't work. Imagine the panic when you hear whatever is going on outside beginning to become full impact, full force. Imagine the panic you're going to face. Now imagine the same scenario when you're home and you have zero power. Or imagine the panic when a building starts burning and you have zero power and you cannot get out. What I want you to imagine is things that you probably don't think about in terms of your own life safety and that of your family. I've been in a building and I've been in restaurants where the power has failed to the point where you could not get out. If you didn't have a little flashlight on your keychain, you could not get out. You could not find your way out, let alone in smoke. So I think that if we were to imagine a little bit about any time in our life where we woke up in the middle of the night and it was totally pitch black dark and we couldn't find our way out of our own bedroom or out of our own hotel room or any of those kind of scenarios, just imagine those kind of pictures and you say to yourself, I should never let myself get into that situation. It is so easy, it is so inexpensive, it takes so little effort to do this. We spend so much time planning back to school, planning vacation, planning for the holidays. We spend a lot of time and a lot of money on those kind of things. What about our own personal safety in the event of a disaster? And there are so many things that can befall us. I go crazy every time I see a story of people that get killed in a house fire, whether or not the smoke detectors were working, whether or not there's batteries in them. I just don't understand why people do that. I also don't understand why people have to go in to save people once they get out. There's an old expression, once out, stay out. Many people go back in and never make it out a second time. When you have pets, when you have children, you have to have a plan.
Tell me, what did we learn from Katrina, and what have we learned from that fateful day of September 11, 2001?
I don't want to split hairs, but I have learned over the last 10 years the difference between lessons learned and lessons used. There is a big difference. There are a lot of lessons we've learned from Katrina. The question is, what are we doing about them? And I see in many cases the same things happening again and again and again. I'll give you just one example.
Sure.
2 weeks ago, we had an incident in the state of Indiana at a fair. We had a temporary structure blow down in a wind gust and kill 6 people.
Yes.
2 days later, I saw in the paper that the emergency plan for that event was a single piece of paper. And the first thing I said to my wife is, what have we learned? How can we have an event where we have thousands of people, a very temporary structure, and we have absolutely no plan if something should go wrong, let alone plan if something should go wrong. 50, 60, 70, 80 mile an hour winds in this country are not unusual anymore. They happen all the time. So why would we put together a structure and no plan in the event that wind comes unexpectedly and takes it out? That's the kind of scenario I'm talking about, where we've learned lessons about preparedness. We all talk about it, but at the end of the day, we had no plan to deal with that situation. I know it came out very short, but the worst part about it is that it happened. And now everybody is finger pointing and saying, well, we didn't do this, we didn't do that, and that's just unacceptable. So I'm not sure what we've learned. I know that there's a lot of lessons that we should have learned and a lot of things that we have not done, but this country is not much better prepared in many ways than we were 10 years ago for a disaster, whether it be an airplane crash into a building or whether it be any of these natural disasters or a terrorist attack or an incident of workplace violence. We still have workplace violence. We still have school shootings. We still have lots of people getting injured. If I had my way, I would train every student in every school in the country what to do if somebody walks into a room with a gun. And the very first thing I would tell people is start throwing things. Just start throwing things. Distract. Get control. We got to stop the problem. I know it sounds easy to say that, but all I'm trying to do is focus on the fact that I think we should do more. Let me get on my soapbox.
Let me ask you this, and you've got your finger on the pulse of the emergency preparedness scenario in the United States. Is the United States and Homeland Security ready to handle another terrorist attack like September 11?
I think it's a mixed bag answer. I think yes and no. I just read something the other day that the potential for a major disaster, and I'm not even going to explain what I mean by a major disaster, because I think we all know there's only one kind of disaster. It can be just beyond. But it seems like we are not prepared for the big one in a lot of ways. And that is very concerning. Certainly, you could argue about immigration and borders all day long for a variety of reasons, but the point is it's still probably easy to get a suitcase bomb into this country if you wanted to. And that is very, very frightening. I think to a large extent there has been, no question, the government, the U.S. government under the Bush administration, under the Obama administration, the last 10 years, no question, there are thousands of very devoted people have spent a lot of time and a lot of effort doing a lot of great things. My hat's off to a lot of people. What I'm concerned about is leadership. I just don't know whether or not politics hasn't gotten in the way of leadership to the point where we have not done a lot of things that we should be doing. My example with the Indiana issue is probably one of them, where we have different interest groups doing different things and not doing the right thing, and nobody asks the right questions.
That's very true.
I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Yeah. If you were in charge of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness, or FEMA, what would your first duty be?
Get more input from the grassroots. I think you and I probably have better ideas in many cases than the politicians do, or some of the people that are in charge.
That's scary.
Yeah, it is. It is. But every time I see people interviewed on the T&D about some kind of an event, or I see members of the public, just from the public at large, offering an opinion, I'm often amazed and overwhelmed and surprised and very pleased. We have some great thinkers in this country that are not in positions of power or authority. They're just folks like you and I. We do what we do, but they have some great ideas, and I think we need a lot more down-home, grassroots thinking. There's an old expression: if you really want to know what's going on in your company, ask the people that work there, not the front office.
And that, it's, once again, comes down to common sense.
Yes. Well, yes, we need more common sense.
Mind you, after watching the debt ceiling debates, I think that we still have a long way to go.
That's a good example of where everybody's getting in the way of everybody else's underwear, and I just don't understand that. So the answer to your question, I think, is that I would like to see more and more and more down-home folks that are in the trenches to be able to offer up suggestions. But there's been a lot of resistance. I know when the oil crisis in the Gulf occurred last year, there were thousands of people that offered suggestions. I'm not sure that there was any capability of even beginning to handle a lot of them, but there were some really great ideas, and they were rejected, and these people were just not involved, and that really was concerning to a lot of people that saw that.
Norris, stand by. You and I have to take our final break. Please stand by. X Zone Nation, our very special guest this hour, Norris Beren, and his website is www.norrisspeaks.com. I'll be back on the other side as we continue here in the X Zone with yours truly, Rob McConnell, and my special guest this hour, Norris Beren. All right, hold on here. I've got to ask you a question, Craig. You've played a whole lot of shaking going on, Jerry Lee Lewis, The Morning After by Maureen McGovern, and now Right Said Fred's I'm Too Sexy. What do they all have in common? They're all disasters. Thank you. We're talking about 100 plus ways to make sure your family is ready for any emergency situation. My very special guest this hour is Norris Beren. He is the author of a book that I believe everyone should have in their home and read together and plan. Plan for emergencies. Don't wait till they happen and say, what do we do now? Planning is the key, Exonation. The name of Norris's book is When Disaster Strikes Home, 100 Plus Ways to Protect Your Family from Unthinkable Emergencies. Once again, his website is www.norrisspeaks.com. That's norrisspeaks.com. And Norris, thank you very much for joining us. It's been a great pleasure having you here with us. What are your final thoughts that you'd like to leave with the Exonation tonight?
As I mentioned earlier, I think if you could try and at least avoid getting caught unprepared, that's a good thing. Education is probably the right answer. I saw a comment today in the media from the I think he's the director of the Emergency Management Division of the state of South Carolina, and the article was talking about the storm Irene that was heading toward the U.S., and he said that while we have had 3 years of no storms, haven't had any major storms in South Carolina in 7 years, he said, quote, I'm not worried about complacency. That is a big problem for most folks, is they just don't think about the possibility something happening to them. And as I said a few minutes ago, just ask yourself what you would do if you were in a situation, or remember when you were in a situation where you needed help, you didn't have water, you didn't have food, you didn't have power, or what would you do, especially with pets, people in need, children. Ask yourself, is it worth it? Or is it worth just sitting down with a pad of paper and trying to make some notes and ask yourself some basic questions? What could happen? How will we communicate? What are the most important things we need to do and need to have? I created a safety map, a one-page color safety map, which summarizes most of what we talked about today. And for anybody who wants to send me an email, I'd be glad to just send it to them. It's the place to start. The books are important, but the safety map will be the place to start.
As I said, Norris, it's been great having you with us. I wish you continued success, and thank you very much for all the wonderful work that you do in helping each and every one of us be prepared for an emergency situation.
And thanks for having me.
Look forward to talking to you the next time when we're going to be talking to you about your new book, Prostate Cancer. Hope It's Not a Strategy. Tips from a Survivor. Exonation, our guest this hour has been Norris Beren. His website is www.norrisspeaks.com, and I'll be back on the other side of this commercial break with the news at 6.5 minutes past as the X-Zone continues from our studios here in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. My name is Rob McConnell. Don't go away.